Hello everybody! I've moved my desk setup and I haven't set up the shelving yet. I know that I did the video being like, look at my shelf! But now it's completely different. I think Daddy got sick of me making clickety-clack noises in the bedroom when he was trying to get to sleep. But also, I've been a very good bunny, so I've been given a can of iron brew. So you may have seen my post. I made a long chapter today. It was mainly because I just got in a bit and I couldn't stop writing and there wasn't really a good place to stop. So yeah, I just kept going. So a lot of stuff happens in here, but it's not really like, it's not all breakneck action, but just like a couple of things happen. So this is chapter 7, I think we're up to. Yeah, this is chapter 7. Might also be chapter 8. I don't know, or just a really long, Frankenstein-y, freaky long chapter. Sorry, I gotta move stuff. My mic wasn't recording. That's embarrassing. You know what? Whatever. I don't care. Today you're just getting camera audio. Whatever. I'm sure it's fine. Also, this is Daisy. I had to get a wife for Donald. He was lonely. He needed duck company. So let's get stuck into it. This is chapter 7 of Littleland. As the others drifted off to sleep, one by one, Vanessa lay awake. All she was able to focus on was the crinkly plastic strapped to her behind and the growing pressure in her bladder. It was logical, really. She had to pee. She had a place in which to pee. But she couldn't do it. She lacked the calm required to relax and wet her diaper, and the plastic was chafing her thighs. If she could just adjust herself slightly, maybe she would be comfortable enough to give in to the temptation of sleep. Her eyes heavy, Vanessa reached down underneath the blanket and to the bottommost tapes that were rasping against her skin. She unfastened them, and the relief was immediate. Now, slightly more comfortable, Vanessa relaxed against her pillow and gave in to her exhaustion, full bladder and all. Dr. Gilbert frowned at the screen that monitored the nursery. The comparison to Stoker's most prolific character hadn't fazed him. The similarity couldn't be denied. He was used to the kinds of conversations their new charges typically had on the first night in the park, as they discovered challenges that had previously been unconsidered and settled into their new environment. This sudden and raucous discord between his two newest, however, concerned him, as did the language. "Gilbert, please try not to panic," said Emily, to his right. "They're going to be okay." Gilbert's brow furrowed further as he continued to observe, electing not to respond to Emily's trademark optimism. Mia and Emily shared a look of good-natured exasperation. It was in Gilbert's nature to worry. "She's correct, Gilbert," said Mia, placing a comforting hand on his black-clad shoulder. "A little bit of bickering is normal." Ethan entered the room, a cup of coffee in his hand. The caregivers were unaffected by caffeine, but Ethan enjoyed the warmth of the liquid. He set the coffee cup down on the desk. "I think this goes beyond bickering," said Gilbert, his chin resting on his fist, brows furrowing further as he surveyed the new charges. "We'd be breaking up a brawl if they could get to each other, and your pipe is getting worked up. I think I should go in there." "No," said Ethan, pulling up a chair alongside the three already consulting the monitors. "They can't get out of their cribs. They're not going to have a fight." Ethan gestured to the monitors, where Piper waved her hands animatedly. And Piper is always worked up. Oh no, my hat. "So can you please all just be nice to each other?" shouted Piper over the speaker. Ethan began to laugh, and was soon joined in mirth by Emily, who was, as usual, quick to smile. "It's good advice," she offered. "She's not wrong," agreed Ethan, smiling encouragingly at Gilbert, who returned a more muted version of his expression. "She's not," nodded Gilbert, "though I could do without the profanity hinted at or otherwise." "Look," said Mia, motioning towards the screen depicting Frank and Danny's awkward reconciliation. They did it. They worked it out. And you didn't have to go in there and wallop anyone, said Ethan, leaning back in his chair and folding his arms across his chest. Not yet, anyway, said Gilbert, who rolled his own chair backward in order to regard the entire group of caregivers at once. What is our plan? Emily sighed. I know it needs to be done, but I wish it didn't, she said, softly. Once again, Mia offered her colleague a comforting pat on the shoulder. I know it's difficult for you, but we need to follow through on discipline, said Mia, gently. He's just such a sweet little boy. I almost can't bear the thought of hurting him, said Emily, gazing at Aiden through the screen, her brown eyes sparkling. You don't need to thrash the boy, said Ethan. You just need to be firm. Emily nodded in response and took in a settling breath. I know, and I have a feeling he'll respond well to structure. How did Danny respond? Asked Mia, addressing Gilbert. I hate to admit it, but Francois was fairly correct in his performance, said Gilbert, thoughtfully. He didn't give me too much physical resistance, but he did beg, which is to be expected. Piper kicks with everything she's got, said Ethan, with a faux pained expression on his face. I have a feeling Francois will be the inverse. He's verbally stoic, but I can see him resisting. How do you suppose your Vanessa will respond? Asked Emily, who smiled sympathetically at Mia's concerned expression. Mia paused, considering the question. Tears, she said, though I'm wondering if a spanking is even necessary for her. I'm not so sure about that, said Ethan, pointing at the screen. He turned the dial that controlled the volume in the little girl's cubicle. The sound of unfastening tapes was unmistakable. The caretakers watched as Vanessa returned to her supine position and let her heavy eyelids drop. Vanessa, said Mia, sighing. What would you all do, go back in there and re-diaper her? It's been hours since she arrived. She'll have to go by now. Just leave her be until morning, said Emily, gently. She'll only need to wake up with a wet bed once before she learns. Sunlight was streaming in from the window nearest Vanessa, and it pooled in the topmost corner of her bed, encouraging her eyes to open. She rolled towards the patch of sunlight and stretched her knees up towards her chest, soaking in the warmth like a small lizard. She was content for a moment, before a startling realization hit and stirred her from her state of post-sleep calm. The rustling was absent. Vanessa's eyes widened, and she slid a hand beneath the covers. This short exploration confirmed two of her suspicions. One, her backside was completely bare, the diaper having removed itself during the night and become lost amongst the blankets. Two, she was lying in a puddle. The calm dissipated immediately and was replaced with panic. The evening prior, in her sleep-deprived state, Vanessa had attempted to reconcile the fact that she would be turned over Miss Mia's knee at some point today. She had thought she'd made peace with it. Now that the threat loomed ever greater, owing to this new, wet misfortune, she realized that she hadn't. Vanessa was not ready to be spanked, nor was she ready to be discovered in this sodden state. She sat up, her eyes darting from one corner of the crib to the other, searching for a solution. All she saw was blankets, bars, and Chip the stuffed bunny, who was of no help. Out of options, Vanessa allowed her anxiety-riddled brain to take control and devise a plan that was almost entirely doomed to fail. She began to strip the bed, awkwardly maneuvering herself around the sheets. She had still not located the diaper by the time she balled up the soiled linen and threw it over the side of her crib. She had been aiming for the underside of the crib, but the sheets didn't reach that target. Instead, they unfurled themselves mid-air. They landed in disarray on the floor outside her cubicle, the missing diaper visible atop the pile. Vanessa sat back on her heels, regarding the mess. As predicted, her anxiety-driven plan had failed. And not to be outdone, the failure had been spectacular. Vanessa let out a short, defeated laugh and threw her hands into the air. Now that there was no possible way of claiming any innocence, Vanessa began to make genuine peace with what was to come later that day, however painful it was sure to be. By now, she could hear the others stirring in their cubicles, and Vanessa craned her neck towards the source of the noise. It was Piper, who was leaning out of her crib and staring at the floor. "What is that?" whispered Piper, pointing to the pile. Vanessa was unsure how to answer. "What is this?" came a deep voice from the right. Vanessa, still unsure how to answer, shivered as Dr. Gilbert stepped into view. He looked repeatedly between her and the pile, his expression unreadable. Vanessa tried to simultaneously swallow the lump that had appeared in her throat and formulate a response. The result was a strangled sort of noise. Dr. Gilbert's unreadable expression transformed briefly, and Vanessa saw him quirk a tiny smile. Dr. Gilbert took one large step over the pile and into her cubicle. As he strode closer, Vanessa noted that her mouth had dried out entirely. "What happened, little one?" he asked. "Did you have an accident?" Strictly speaking, no, she hadn't. But Vanessa couldn't figure out a way to articulate what had actually happened. She had loosened her diaper, peed all over her bed, balled up the evidence, and, in an attempt to hide it, splayed it all over the room. Technically, the part involving pee hadn't been intentional. And neither was the part where she pitched her urine-soaked sheets into the corridor, so those could be considered accidents. The loosening hadn't been. The disposal of the evidence hadn't been either, though technically she supposed the act of bedwetting could be considered an accident. She hadn't intended to wet the bed. All she wanted to do was ease the chafing feeling on her thighs, but still, the evidence! Vanessa shook her head and returned to the present moment. Her thoughts had been spiraling. "No?" asked Dr. Gilbert. Said Vanessa. "Ooh, who left their sheets here?" asked Miss Emily, stepping into view. "Mia, I think your little one missed you." Asked Miss Mia, as she followed Miss Emily down the corridor. "Is that so? Were you trying to get my attention, sweetie?" She stooped to retrieve the ball of wet laundry on the floor, which she deposited into a chute on the far wall. Once more, all Vanessa seemed able to produce was A dark blush spread across Vanessa's cheeks as she was regarded in her half-dressed state. Was the entire world going to congregate in this one cubicle? Miss Mia, sensing her discomfort, came forward and scooped Vanessa from her crib. They retreated down the hall, away from the other caregivers that had gathered, and into a changing room. Miss Mia placed Vanessa down onto the changing table. "First, let's get you cleaned up, and then we can talk about what happened, okay?" Vanessa didn't move during her change. The humiliation from earlier had cowed her into a quiet submission, and she readily allowed her hands to be buckled into the mittens. She noted hazily that the mittens in this room were blue as opposed to yellow, as if that made any difference to the situation. Vanessa allowed herself to be maneuvered and taped into a fresh diaper. Miss Mia removed her damp bodysuit. She slipped a yellow, collared tunic dress over her head and a pair of white socks onto her feet. Once dressed, Miss Mia transferred her to a set of couches that lined the wall. She was positioned facing the wall. Vanessa's heart sank. This was an atypical form of corner time, sitting on a couch, but the feeling of rejection was swift all the same. She'd never considered it before, but now that she was experiencing it, being placed into a corner and left with her thoughts was the worst punishment Vanessa could imagine. She soon learned that this realization was misplaced for that particular time, however. The couch springs groaned from behind her, and she soon felt Miss Mia's fingers begin to detangle her hair. The strange feeling of relief was strong, and Vanessa relaxed at her caregiver's touch. Miss Mia produced a brush and gently began to remove the knots from Vanessa's light brown hair. This hat, I swear to goodness. All right, honey, said Miss Mia, working through Vanessa's nest of bed hair. Would you like to tell me what happened? Okay, said Vanessa. I was trying to go to sleep last night, she began hesitantly, and the tapes are rubbing my legs, so I undid them, finished Vanessa. But I only did the bottom ones. I wasn't trying to... Vanessa trailed off. Miss Mia made a slow noise of understanding. Ah. Keep going, darling, said Miss Mia, still tackling the more stubborn knots in Vanessa's hair. Then what happened? Vanessa groaned inwardly and shifted uncomfortably in place. I peed in my sleep, she said softly. Ah, said Miss Mia, and with your diaper off it had nowhere else to go. Yeah, said Vanessa, twisting her fingers into anxious knots in her lap. And I didn't know what to do, so I took the sheets off the bed and I tried to put them on the floor, but I can't throw. Miss Mia gave a soft laugh. So they went into the corridor, she finished. Yeah, whispered Vanessa. Okay, I see what happened, said Miss Mia, as she finished Vanessa's hair and set the brush aside. Thank you for explaining, sweetheart. Now that you've let me know what happened, there's a few things we need to go over, said Miss Mia, placing her hands beneath Vanessa's arms and guiding her backward to rest on the broad maternal lap. It's against the rules to play with your diaper, okay? Okay, whispered Vanessa, feeling a gentle shame settle in her belly. Because if you do, things like this happen, said Miss Mia. It's not your job to deal with laundry, okay, sweetie? That's my job. Once more, Vanessa nodded wordlessly. In the future, if you have an accident in the middle of the night, here's what I want you to do. Are you with me? Yes. There's a nightlight on the wall next to your crib. If you need me in the middle of the night, I want you to lean over and turn it on. Then I'll know, okay? Vanessa, again, nodded. All right, sweetie, said Miss Mia. I need to tell you a few things, and I want you to try your best to listen. First of all, began Miss Mia, it's okay that you had an accident. These things happen. Vanessa, listening anxiously, twisted her hands. She couldn't allow herself to feel relief. She could hear the but that was sure to follow. You know that from now on, you're not allowed to touch your diaper or take your sheets off the bed, continued Miss Mia. You're not in trouble for those things, okay? Okay. But we do need to have a serious talk this afternoon before your nap. We do? Asked Vanessa, stealing a glance upward to gauge Miss Mia's expression. It was what she'd come to expect. Firm, but not angry, and not unkind. Vanessa relaxed some, despite the mention of a serious talk. About the naughty thing you all got up to yesterday, said Miss Mia, smiling wryly down at Vanessa. Vanessa's cheeks coloured. Oh, so I just want to reiterate to you, honey, you're not getting a spanking for having an accident. That's the most natural thing in the world for a little one, said Miss Mia, and Vanessa cringed. You'll be going over my knee for trying to pull a vanishing act. That's not something you're able to get away with here. Do you understand? Vanessa did understand, though it would be an understatement to say she was unhappy to admit it. She gave a little nod, along with a quiet whimper. Good girl, said Miss Mia, pulling her close for a hug that Vanessa couldn't help but relax into. The hug calmed her, but Vanessa's mind and belly still swam with emotion. Fear, apprehension, shame, all mixed with an undercurrent of something muddled she couldn't identify. As she contemplated this afternoon's fate, Miss Mia began to rub her back in slow, gentle circles. Vanessa did what she usually did in times of confusing emotions. She put it out of her mind and closed her eyes. The end of chapter 7. I hope you guys liked it. It's a little bit longer than usual. Okay. Bye everybody.